Good morning, everyone. I hope you guys had a beautiful past week. My name is Jordan Smith, and I am the voice and the astrologer behind the webpage nonconformistconscience.com. I have a Facebook page, Nonconformist Conscience, and an Instagram under the same name. This week, we have some things going down in the cosmos that I'm going to talk about. One of them being Mercury is going to station and go into its post shadow as it goes direct after stationing. And I will talk a little bit more about what that means here in a bit. But right now, I'm going to jump into some other planetary conversations that are happening this week as a way to inform everyone what they could be feeling or experiencing, how they can consciously work with these energetics at play. So over the past couple of weeks, I have been talking about this Saturn square Uranus, and this is still playing out. It is going to play out until mid-October. Saturn and Uranus are both retrograde. And with retrograde planets, this really symbolizes the need to evolve from where we have been, from the known, from the familiar. So whenever we have this many retrogrades going on, we know that this is a period of time where there can be an acceleration of individuation, as Carl Jung talked about, or an acceleration of growth. Any planet that is retrograde has an individuating quality about it, meaning that the point of it being retrograde is for you to go within and revisit or redo something that maybe you didn't really get right the first time or the second or the third, right? And with the retrogrades, they are really meant for all of us to not only go within, but to look at the inner content within where maybe we're stagnating. That way we can become aware of it. So there's this objectivity that comes with retrogrades. And the objectivity is needed as a way to be able to see how we need to change or how we need to grow or how we need to do things differently than we have before. So with Saturn square Uranus, this is a evolutionary gate for us to all, if we're working consciously with the energetics and the dynamics that are going on inside of us, to excel our growth and our evolution at a more rapid pace. So Saturn, let's break this down. Saturn in Aquarius. Whenever Saturn has been in Aquarius in the past, we have seen social revolution, the civil rights, things of these natures. And it goes with the collective conscious as a way to help shape it, to change the status quo, to liberate from the things that are creating stagnation within the growth of the collective. And it does the same thing for all of us personally. Saturn is about structures. It's about the structure of our consciousness. It is about the skin that we are in. It is all about how we were conditioned when we were brought up. And if you're someone who believes in past lives and has that belief, it shows us where we are carrying prior life conditioning. So with Saturn in Aquarius retrograde on a personal level, this is really looking at the inner content that is creating stagnation. It is looking at the ways in which we have been conditioned to think and to believe. It's looking at all of our inner conditioning that stems from our family, from society, the communities that we find ourselves in, and also from religion. Religion is, a patriarchal phenomenon. And so this is right in alignment with Saturn. And so there is a need to liberate from the crystallized structures within that are no longer working or in resonance with who we are on a soul level and for our soul growth and evolution. So there is really this call to revisit the ways in which we have been conditioned. Saturn is squaring Uranus and Taurus, and Uranus is the planetary ruler of this Saturn and Aquarius. Uranus and Taurus is about being an observer of oneself and how one is in relationship to oneself. It's looking at, what do I value? From those values that I have, what gives me meaning? What are the natural resources that I find within myself that can create self-sufficiency, which is an archetype of Taurus, being self-sufficient. There is a need to be grounded and rooted in oneself, not in an egotistical way, but in a self-sufficient way, as a way to provide oneself with your own needs. So with this square from Saturn to Uranus, there's really this need, it's a call to action to liberate from the crystallized structures that are preventing growth within. And how we do that is by looking at the ways in which we've been conditioned to view ourselves, how to be in relationship to self, and our conditioned values, and how we've been conditioned to give meaning to things. If we've been giving meaning, ultimate meaning to things outside of ourselves and creating dependencies instead of giving and meeting our own needs. So this is a time where we can really excel our evolutionary growth if we have the determination, Saturn, and make the conscious effort to really look within and to ask oneself in an individuated place, from an individuated place, is this what I think? Is this what I believe? Is this what I value? Is this what really gives me meaning? In prior weeks, I've talked about checking boxes, which this is kind of this phenomenon that's going on with this Saturn square Uranus. And what I mean by that is, one of the first ways we can start really looking at our conditioning is, well, in society right now, we know the status quo, the consensus says, if you go to college, you can check that box. That's gives you meaning. Then after college, you have a partner, you are in a relationship, you get married, check. Then you buy a house, check. Then you have a kid, check. You have a career, check. You have money and, notoriety or in society or all of these things. A lot of this with this Taurus, component to it can be, for some, there is a conditionality in the way in which they give meaning to the things that they have in their life, the things that they accumulate, like jewelry, how they, look. I have 3 cars, I have 4 houses, these things. So it's really looking at, have you been checking these boxes and do you feel fulfilled? Or are these values that have been conditioned on you, and now you're wondering, why do I not feel like I have a meaningful life whenever I've bought into this, that if I do X, Y, and Z, I will be happy? So this is what we're working with. These are the ways in which we're all supposed to be viewing and looking at things. There's a component to this also of, with this Aquarian Uranian energy, you could be someone who is realizing that your values are very different from your families or from the society or the religion that you were raised in, and you are really coming to the understanding that it is different. Your values are very different. It's not what gives you meaning. it just doesn't cut it. It doesn't do it for you. If you are that person, this is a time to really look at that content and investigate it and observe it as a way to really liberate from it and to ultimately feel like you're living a meaningful life, right? That is in alignment with who you are and what your intrinsic values and needs are. And understanding that you can meet those needs and, on your own without any type of exterior dependency. That's my dog, Connie. Sorry, guys. So I wanted to reiterate about this. I know that I might sound like a broken record player to some because I keep talking about this, but it is because it is important and it is worth mentioning. This week, we also have Mercury trining Pluto. Both are in earth signs. Mercury is still retrograde while this trine is happening. Mercury is in the sign of Virgo. It is trining Pluto, who is retrograde in the sign of Capricorn. This is really about taking this information that we have been intuiting and gathering throughout this Mercury retrograde process and coming into a deep understanding by analyzing it and using this information as a way to, transform. And so with this trine going on between these two air signs, from Virgo, we learn discernment. We learn what knowledge is through being an apprentice of our life and the experiences that we have. And through this apprenticeship of life, we gather this information, we take it in. Virgo is a yin energy, so it's internalized instead of externalized. It's not being projected out, it's going within, and it is creating knowledge or gnosis from these experiences. There is a need to look at the ways in which we keep coming back to these kind of habitual cyclical patterns in our lives. And as we've been doing that with this trine to Pluto, it's really getting us in touch with not only discernment and knowledge, but it's now being able to disseminate this in a way in which we can make correct judgment. From discernment, we are able to make correct judgment. We are able to make a judgment call. Judgment is a universal experience that all of us have as humans. It's just, it can be naturally expressed and it can be distorted. The naturally expressed way of using judgment is through discernment, through this air trine that's happening. And within the Capricorn archetype is gained wisdom. And that gained wisdom helps us make a correct judgment. So if there's something that any of you guys have been, wondering, how do I go about doing this? How, having clarification about something and needing to make a judgment call, this is a really good time that if you go within, you can find the answers that you are seeking to make that judgment call. With this trine, it is a conversation that really speaks to being able to understand the dynamics that have been happening prior to this and understanding why those dynamics happened. And that really speaks to gaining that wisdom, right? Once we have an understanding, we are able to integrate it and have wisdom about that. And then to be able to live that wisdom out in our day-to-day life from moment to moment. And this conversation really speaks to that. With that, there's also as easily as it is to come to an understanding to do this, it is a trine, and that can kind of create laziness for some. So there, it can be easily resisted to make that judgment call, to go within and to really discern. And that is because if we're looking at habitual patterns and relational cycles that we've all been, observing, it can be resisted because of the familiarity of those cycles for us. It can be really scary for some to choose to do something different. So this can be easily resisted, and then the cycle persists. But the good news is, like I said, is if you are someone who takes the action to do this, to make the judgment call, to go within, to have a better understanding of what's been going on, it is easily integrated. These lessons are very easily integrated. It's just, I liken it to being on the high dive at the pool and looking down and being scared. And then once you jump, there's a moment before you hit the water of, oh my gosh. Once you hit the water, you're good, and you get to swim off, and you get to go out and do it again. And so to kind of remember that it has this feel, it can be really scary standing on that precipice of doing something different, but once you do, it is easily integrated. There can be a lot for people coming up around what guilt and judgment is for them with this as well. And the way in which we view judgment and guilt, and the way in which it has been projected on us by others, and we have served as the vessel for the container of others' shame and guilt and judgment, and have really been carrying it as our own. And so there is a need to go within to look at this if this is pertaining to you. Mars is in Gemini, and it is also trine Saturn. So this really speaks to continuing to act on, or not act, it's still a choice, desires that we're having as a way to reformulate and recontextualize and redefine the things in which we have defined in our lives prior. If you are consciously working with the energetics that have been playing out, there is a redefinition that needs to go on, and this speaks to that. We are really liberating from the ways in which we've given meaning and what our values are and all of these other things. Well, we need to redefine the way in which we, have values, redefine what our values are, redefine what gives us meaning. And this really speaks to that. And it also speaks to the need to continue the process of, whenever you see something that needs to be redefined in your life, to continue to liberate from it instead of resisting it. So there is a repeat, redo quality about this, just because Mars is in a conversation with Saturn, and Saturn is retrograde. So that also creates a oblique retrograde in Mars, meaning that when a retrograde planet aspects another planet that is not retrograde, the planet that is not retrograde takes on the energetics of being retrograde. And I feel like this is really interesting because next month, Mars is going to be going retrograde in the sign of Gemini, and it will be in the sign of Gemini for 7 months. That is a long time for Mars to stay in a sign. So with Mars being in aspect to Saturn retrograde and having this oblique retrograde effect on it, it gives us a look into the Mars retrograde cycle just a little bit and how that feels. Mars wants to go, go, go. It wants to react. It is instinctual. It's, yang energy. So it's energy moving outwards. But when Mars is retrograde, there is a need to learn how to be responsive instead of reactive. So there is a need to really evaluate and get to the bottom of how we want to redefine things. And then that speaks back to this Saturn-Uranus square, which is really getting to know oneself and really getting to know what our values are. And sometimes how that process begins is by figuring out what is not working. These values do not feel like they will meet my own needs. And so with this Mars trine Saturn, there is a need to really look at what one's needs are as a way to redefine them. So really getting in touch with whom you are on a very personal level and going within. There is a huge call with all of these energetics and all of these planets retrograde right now to go within, to go internally, to view and look at oneself very deeply, to penetrate, to get to the bottom of what is going on inside of us. So, excuse me, on the 30th, Mercury is going to still be retrograde in Virgo and is going to be opposing Neptune in the sign of Pisces, which is also retrograde. It's just a continuing on of this retrograde energy. Mercury was opposing Neptune in August. And there is something that can come up for all of us to revisit that we were looking at back in August, pertaining to the archetypal nature of this Mercury opposition to Neptune. Anytime we have an opposition, there is a need to come back into balance with oneself in some type of way. Mercury in the sign of Virgo wants us to look at the ways in which we have felt guilt, whether or not it is natural, meaning that we have actually done something wrong or in the past that we should feel guilty for, or whether we have been conditioned to feel guilty from doing things that are actual naturally expressions of the human existence. Mercury started its retrograde journey in the sign of Libra, and it has retrograded back into Virgo. And so we are looking at these and learning about Mercury, these relational patterns that have been habitual cycles that have played out for a very long time. And with Mercury opposing Neptune in the sign of Pisces retrograde, there can be a revisiting as to how we have contextualized or defined something and given it ultimate meaning. And when that happens, it prevents growth and evolution. Because what that symbolizes is we're creating a dependency on something outside of ourselves instead of meeting our own intrinsic needs. And so there is a review and a revisit of this, and to look at all of the ways in which we have bought into illusions of perfection or delusions of how we've viewed ourselves the delusion of feeling guilt or shame for things that we shouldn't be feeling guilt or shame for. And so with this opposition, there's a call to come back into balance and to really understand that the love, Neptune, that we are searching for is not outside of ourselves. We can never put ultimate meaning on something outside of ourselves, because that will always induce the fear of abandonment. And so there's a deep lesson within this Mercury opposition to Neptune about not abandoning oneself, not abandoning who you are or sacrificing who you are to have relationships with others, or to be, in a work profession that is really not in resonance with what your values are. So there is a deep need to look at the way in which these things have or can create an imbalance. My dog was breathing into the microphone, so I hope you guys couldn't hear it. But ultimately, this really symbolizes a need to integrate the lesson of loving oneself, of the love that we are looking for is never going to be something that we need to depend on. Now, I'm not talking about little kids, okay? But as adults, this is about really coming to this deep understanding. And it's an intuitive thing because Mercury is retrograde, meaning that instead of doing the linear thing that Mercury likes us to do, the logic, it's wanting us to more have bring in our intuitive function about this. This Mercury Neptune opposition is going to be happening from the 30th to the 2nd, and it will stop. Opposition will stop whenever Mercury stations and then moves direct. So there is a dissolving process that is wanting to happen, a dissolving of the old ways in which we have created dependencies or have given ultimate meaning to something that is not from within or from spirit source. So some can experience disillusionment with this, planetary conversation, meaning you're not who I thought that you were, and feeling very disillusioned by that situation. Ultimately, I've experienced disillusionment, and Jeffrey Wolf Green totally talks about this, that it is one of the hardest experiences for a human to have. And I would agree, because there's a realization once the dust settles, because Neptune is very nebulous. You don't really know what's going on when the crisis is occurring. You don't understand everything that's trying to come up to surface, and that only just perpetuates this disillusionment process. But when we experience disillusionment, which is an archetype of the Virgo Pisces axis, it is really to understand that the only thing that we should be giving ultimate meaning to is source. There's a spiritualizing quality about disillusionment. It's really not about suffering. The disillusionment occurs when we don't listen to ourselves or pay attention to our intuition, to our higher selves. I hear people talk about red flags and stuff. This occurs whenever that happens, and that's because there's a resistance to listening to oneself. And what can happen is we can pull to the Virgo side, which is where this imbalance could be occurring for others, is still trying to control the situation, still trying to control how someone views you or sees you, or how they value you, or only seeing the best in someone else instead of seeing the truth, Neptune, as it's unfolding. And that ultimately can create these imbalances. So there is a need to go within and to surrender to the process of what's unfolding for some of us, of where we might have given ultimate meaning, or where we might be trying to control something that we really need to surrender to. Because when we are trying to control, that means we are not living in the present or in the truth. We are living in fear. And as I said, this, planetary conversation really speaks to all the dynamics that have been happening within the past few weeks regarding relational needs. And so there is a need to really surrender to this process unfolding, to deepen our relationship with self and to deepen our relationship with spirit. So when Mercury stations on the 2nd of October, it is going to go direct and it's going to enter the post shadow, meaning that it is going to pass over all of the degrees in which it has already passed over prior to the Mercury retrograde cycle, during the Mercury retrograde cycle, and then it will finally be out of shadow on the 17th. So as this direct motion is occurring, we get a third pass to work on and revisit the dynamics that have been occurring just prior to the Mercury retrograde cycle, during it. And what can happen is now we are able to more clearly understand what is going on as it passes over each one of those degrees. And the reason why the 17th is whenever it will leave its shadow is because that will be when Mercury hits the degree in Libra. I believe it's 8 degrees of of Libra, where it was at whenever it first stationed and went retrograde. So if you want to know more about this week, you can check out the written report. There's a lot of stuff to look at regarding the moon. There is a deep process unfolding of really getting to the bottom and looking at all of the dynamics that have been occurring. Ultimately, this week is a week of fruition, of understanding. It's a week of enjoying the harvest of our hard work, of doing the inner work. At the end of the week, the moon will be in Aquarius, and it will make some conversations with other planets. If you want to know what those are and more detail about it, go to the website nonconformistconscience.com. And it really symbolizes the need to continue to observe oneself and to look at any type of stagnation or resistance that we're having. That is how we're ending this week. It's like the universe is saying, great job, continue on. And we have the moon going through, Scorpio and Sag and Capricorn this week as well. And so it's making some planetary connections and conversations. Like I said, you can read more about it. But these really symbolize, the need to take personal responsibility for the choices that we've made in the past. There is a need to understand and transform and transmute the dynamics that we have been learning and growing through, and to metamorphose them in a different way in which we knew. And there is a lot of relying on the intuition and knowing when to act instinctually on those intuitions that we're having, and ultimately taking responsibility for oneself. So if you like this video, I would appreciate it if you subscribed, share it, like it, do whatever. You can share the written report that's on the website. It's also posted on the Facebook page, Nonconformist Conscience. And as I have said in weeks prior, we are in interesting times and things can be financially taxing on people right now. I usually charge $125 for a natal reading. If you are someone who feels like you would benefit from having a natal reading, someone to look at your chart, and you feel like it would permit growth, you can do a pay what you can. There's information on my website as to how to go about doing that. There's information on the Facebook page as well. I am not going to deny someone who feels like they would benefit from this work. I feel like that is a big problem with what is going on in the world, is this exclusivity and this privilege, and it has to deal with money. There are a lot of people not getting their medical, emotional, and financial needs, Taurus, and Uranus, by the way, because of this exclusivity and this privilege. I am someone who wants to practice what I preach. I am someone who wants to walk the talk. If I am talking about these things, I want to live it out in my life. And so if you are someone who does not have financial means, but is seeking help or a deeper understanding about something, you can book up an appointment with me. I'm not going to turn you away. You can pay what you can, you can do trade, you can talk to me, we can figure something out. So I hope you all have a beautiful week, and I will be back next week to go over more of the astrology, and I will see you then.